Salutare, salutare! Ne uităm împreună la cel mai recent videoclip al lui Alex de la History Legends și chibițăm, desigur. Ok? Clipul se intitulează Ukrainian Marines. Dă-mă dracu. Deci, acum dacă ai o șalupă, gata, ești Marines, tătuțu. Decimated in River Crossing Operation. Deci, presupun că este vorba de capetele de pod de peste Dnipro din regiunea Herson. Let's go!
My friends, after the Bakhmut counteroffensive and after the summer counteroffensive, this time Ukraine decided to go all in across the Dnieper.
Ia uitați-vă la faza asta că e drăguț. Ia, scos și subtitrare. Ce bag aici? Conscripții. 3 zile de antrenament. Rezerviștii și ce mai are prin buzunare.
Here from Radio Free Europe, Ukraine has established several breachheads along east bank of the Dnieper River. That's right. Over the past weeks, Ukraine has attempted many river crossings, hoping to expand and consolidate their control over the east bank of the Dnieper, to eventually bring armored units across and push towards Crimea.
A real Turkish unit.
However, to me, a lot of these landings look like amphibious banzai attacks and PR stunts, just to show that Ukraine is still winning.
Aceste PR stunts totuși sunt alimentate cu carne, da? Care trece printr-un tocător. Dar hei, ce nu face omul pentru câteva titluri de presă?
The focal point of this battle currently takes place in a small village called
Krinky.
Khavkinki. That was the situation a month ago, and here's the situation now.
A great success!
Here's good drone footage with a full view of the settlement.
Mamă, ce filmare mișto, bravo.
You can see the marshlands and all the small waterways from where Ukrainian boats would arrive. At this point,
Da, deci vedem, aici, în partea de jos, era Dnipru, aici este Krinky și aici este pădurea. Iar în pădure sunt ruși. Ce putea să fie în pădure? Ursul, desigur.
most of the fighting is taking place in these forested areas south of the village and on both flanks of this Ukrainian breachhead. Every day, new Ukrainian amphibious landings are reported on the east bank of the river, with these reinforcements immediately sent into the meat grinder. Don't believe me? Simply have a look at this article from the
Ukraine War. Un soldat povestește pentru BBC iadul de pe linia frontului.
BBC, and this is what a Ukrainian soldier had to say. The entire river crossing is under constant fire. I've seen boats with my comrades on board just disappear into the water after being hit, lost forever to the Dnieper River. And then he says that the Russians were tipped off by their landing, to which he added, so when we got there, they knew exactly where to find us. They threw everything at us, artillery, mortars, and flamethrower systems. I thought I'd never get out. Now the elite Ukrainian Marines are holding on to this breachhead in Krinky, where they have to face the wrath of Russian firepower in an area 500 meters deep by 2.5 kilometers wide. What's the solution?
Deci cumva rușii le-au făcut lura un fel de mică fâșie gază acolo, da? 500 de metri lățime, 2,5 mii de metri lungime. Fâșie. Bun.
More
O bombardează, hei, că așa se întâmplă în fâșiile astea.
cannon fodder.
Exact.
Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukraine war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know,
Același lucru, vă rog și eu, și după ce vă abonați, nu uitați să apăsați și pe clopoțelul ăla pentru a primi notificări când mai încarc clipuri noi.
some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no
La fel.
ads. So make sure to check out
La fel, că asta e viața, da? Când vorbești despre astfel de evenimente neconvenabile pentru o platformă americană. Să ne înțelegem, YouTube e o platformă americană, se mai întâmplă și necazuri de-astea și din acest motiv și eu vă mulțumesc celor care mă susțineți pe Patreon sau din postura de membri ai canalului Noaptea Minții.
My Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. I know it's boring, but we have to start with logistics. As you can see in this Russian article from 2021, Ukrainian Marines received dozens upon dozens of speedboats and rubber boats, and they probably got many more since then. Those will become the workhorse of the Dnieper campaign. If their advantage is speed, 25 kilometers per hour, and stealth, their main disadvantage is their low carrying capacity. Each boat can only carry one crew member and up to 5 geared up soldiers. Arvan Mountain Dew loving, not for bot. So if you want to ferry an entire platoon with all the necessary supplies, you will need at least 10 boats. But if you all send them at once, they will be detected and destroyed. So you can achieve the same with 2 boats doing 5 trips back and forth each. Now, from what I've read, a standard truck can carry 5 to 7 tons of ammunition and supplies, which would be the equivalent of 10 to 12 boats.
Okay.
On June 26, Ukrainian troops landed in Dachi and established a bridgehead on the other side of the Antonov Bridge. Just like the British paratroopers at Arnhem, they had to hold off enemy armored columns that would be bottlenecked by the paved road. And in the end, the gamble worked. Although the Ukrainians could not push further, the Russians could also not dislodge them. After this Ukrainian tactical victory at Dachi, which
Da? Deci, din vară, din iunie. Ok?
worked as some proof of concept, it was decided to ramp up amphibious landings all across the Dnieper. Another operation took place on the 8th of August at night, when 7 Ukrainian speedboats disembarked 40 men of the 129th Territorial Defense Brigade near the village of Kazachi Lahiri. It's only on the 15th of August, so 1 week later, that the Russians managed to destroy this Ukrainian bridgehead. That same day, the Ukrainians attempted another amphibious operation, this time against Korsunka, but it failed. And same thing for their attempt to disembark troops between Olapristan and Kardashinka on the 24th of August.
Da? Vedeți aici, practic, punerea în operă a proverbului a încerca marea cu degetul. Acolo poate că da, acolo poate că nu, încercăm peste tot și vedem pe unde mai rămânem, nu?
It's important to note that up until then, all these amphibious raids were carried out by men of the territorial defense, literally cannon fodder,
Da.
namely units of the 123rd, 124th, 126th, and 129th Territorial Defense Brigades. As a matter of fact, on the 13th of August, the 126th Territorial Brigade launched an important attack against Kozachi Lahiri, and they held the bridgehead on their own for at least a week until they were forced to pull back. It became clear that this position was very strategic for Ukraine. However, the story really starts in late September, as the Ukrainian counteroffensive in Zaporozhye was turning into a fiasco,
Choices have consequences.
and Ukraine needed a quick PR
Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Da?
stunt to keep the morale of the troops high and show some sort of progress.
Da?
That's
Deci
how-
omul asta ne explică după ce s-a fâsâit contraofensiva, care a început săraca deja fâsâită. Dar după ce a devenit clar pentru toată lumea, mai puțin pentru câțiva talibani gen Radu Hosu, da, că s-a fâsit contraofensiva de vară, Ucraina avea nevoie totuși de niște titluri de presă. Uitați, am debarcat peste Dnipru. Uitați de contraofensiva fâsâită.
Between the 23rd and 25th of September, 4 Marine brigades, namely the 35th, 36th, 37th, and 38th, were transferred from the Vremyevsky salient to the Dnieper. By early October, Ukraine had assembled roughly 13,000 Marines in Kherson, now part of the 30th Marine Corps, which the Russians call Katran Tactical Group. Surprise, surprise, of which 1,000 returned in August after 6 months in the UK, being trained in small boat amphibious operations. The Russians knew that with the arrival of these professional troops, Ukraine decided to increase the difficulty level of the campaign. During the summer, the New York Times said the following about the men of the 37th Marine Brigade.
Cum ideea este că au lăsat-o mai moale cu trupele de territorial defense, ăia care sunt cei mai slabi și cei mai ușor de tocați, și au venit profesioniști antrenați în UK. Hai să vedem ce zice The Times.
They have NATO equipment and Western training. Oh, for sure, that's a clear sign of victory. The battalion commander, Alexander, said that casualties were so high during the counteroffensive in Kherson last year that he had been forced to replace the members of his unit 3 times. Wow. Wait, what? Okay, so now we're open about it.
Asta cum ar veni? 300% pierderi? Să mă corectați dacă mi s-a zăpăcit matematica în cap.
I remember all the NATO bots getting mad at me last year for saying exactly that. They claimed the loss of 1,200 Ukrainian military personnel destroyed. Add another 2,000 wounded and you get 25 to 30% losses within the first 48 hours. Now add to that the casualties of the summer. And that explains what this Ukrainian soldier told the BBC. There are a lot of young guys among us. We need people, but trained people. Not the green ones we have there now. There are guys who had spent just 3 weeks in training and only managed to shoot a few times. And then they wonder why more than 500,000 military-aged males have fled the country and are not coming back. Anyway, mid-October, the Russians felt that something big would come into their face. This is when Ukrainian artillery kept bombarding all the positions between Novakhovka and Sahi. And Russian intelligence noticed the deployment of Cobra and ANTPQ-36 radars, as well as Bukovo electronic warfare stations, all essential for counter-battery fire. On top of that, on the night of October 13th to the 14th, the Ukrainian Navy transferred roughly 80 men aboard 16 boats on the islands of the Dnieper near the Antonov Bridge. The Ukrainian troops worked, and then they doubled down on the 16th. As the Russians were focused on the Antonov Bridge, the real operation took place 7 kilometers to the east. During the night, 2 platoons of the 36th Marine Brigade crossed the river while being covered by mortar crews and captured the villages of Pichanivka and Poima. Very interesting, this time they not only used motorized boats, but they also used paragliders. No, they didn't.
Oh, nu.
But
Da? Fără parapant. Bun.
it would have been very interesting. However, what they did do was to use a destroyed bridge. As you can see in this video, small Ukrainian units of 10 to 20 soldiers simply walked across this former railway bridge to get on the other side of the river. By the 17th of October, up to 300 men of the 36th Marine Brigade reinforced Ukrainian positions in Pichanivka and Poima. Fun fact, I actually spoke about this exact position in my video a couple months back. Knowing that the smallest gap on the Dnieper River is 400 meters, we also know for a fact that the Ukrainians had fully secured the railway bridge. With this video that was geolocated right here, where you can see a Ukrainian soldier carrying ammunition in total calm into one of these houses. Actually, here's a good aerial view of this bridge and the surrounding swamps that are under.
Da? Îl vedeți aici și om la știre.
Ukrainian control. So while the Russian Eye of Sauron was focused in this sector, the Ukrainians sneakily disembarked a squad of 10 men near Frolov Island, and mortar crews started shelling Krinky. The Ukrainian party came to an end on the 18th
Deci, petrecerea ucraineană, scuzați traducerea, da?
of October, when the Russians counterattacked and recaptured Pichanivka and Poima, as well as half the railway bridge. Although I have to say the Russians only certified the win 3 days later. The Ukrainians used the mosquito strategy. The moment they get pushed back, they attack somewhere else. That's how 1 day later, 2 sabotage groups of the 35th Marine Brigade landed in Krinky, probably the guys from Frolov Island. And we know they landed somewhere in this sector because of this video of a Russian FPV drone targeting a Ukrainian fire team inside a building, but also because it's the most logical disembarkation area. You see, the little town of Tiahinka on the other side of the river is one of the largest settlements of the area, and it can be used to shelter a number of troops and supplies. On top of that, there are many convenient roads leading directly to the river. This means that from Tiahinka, Ukrainian boats only have to exit this river, get into the Dnieper for a couple minutes, and then follow this smaller river as a transport corridor right into the village. As you can see in this video recorded at the same spot, there are a lot of swamps that provide natural cover, and those are the small rivers that Ukrainian Marines use to infiltrate Russian-held territory. But sometimes they're out of luck, and a Russian drone is waiting for them. However, most of the time, Russian artillery is not fast enough to catch the enemy boats on the move. It's like trying to tackle Mbappe on the run. Forget it! And just like in football, then the Ukrainians crossed the ball on the other side of the field as they disembarked a number of troops just north of Oleshki on the 21st of November. This town is very strategic because it's one of the two endpoints of the Antonov Bridge. Now the Russians were completely confused. They didn't know if Krinky was just a diversion and that the main assault would actually take place somewhere else. However, all doubt soon dissipated as more and more Ukrainian reinforcements poured into Krinky. For example, on October 30th, 3 assault groups of the 35th Marine Brigade were first transferred to Frolov Island, where we can believe Ukraine has some sort of base, and then to Krinky. In an attempt to halt the flow of enemy reinforcements, the Russians increased their drone activity over Tiahinka, like in this video where they tried to hunt down small squads trying to get into boats near this railway bridge. In the end, the Ukrainians kept expanding their area of control over Krinky, so we can think that Ukrainian electronic warfare assets in the sector did their job. In this video geolocated right here, 1.5 kilometers away from the disembarkation sector, an entire Russian squad was put out of action, all of them killed or wounded. Now this is where the Ukrainians pulled a very interesting move. On October 8th, 2 weeks after the start of the operations near Krinky, a number of Ukrainian Marines were disembarked near Kozachi Laheri. Smart move! Smart move! The goal was probably to take Kozachi Laheri into a pincer, which would then be followed by the capture of this road, which was the only supply line for the Russian defenders of that settlement. Then we can think that part 2 would have been to storm this section of the M14 highway, which would have put the Russians in trouble. Because of the sandpit right in the middle, with this highway in enemy hands, it would cut the Russian front in two. They would have to go through a 60-kilometer detour, or perhaps it was just a diversion. Regardless, during the night of the 13th of November, Ukrainian assault units of the 35th, 36th, and 38th Marine Brigades were transferred to the central part of the settlement under the cover of artillery and mortars. That's how 2 platoons of the 36th Marines got a foothold in the forest area south of the village. The fighting there continued for another week, and it became clear to the Russian command that this Ukrainian operation was like nothing they have experienced before. Of course,
Da, chiar că. Părerea mea așa, Tamnesam vă spun, în mijlocul videoului, practic, dacă tu nu ai reușit în câmp deschis, pe vreme favorabilă, da? Teren drept, fără traversări de apă și așa mai departe, să faci vreo treabă, e mai greu cu niște bărcuțe, da? Mai ales că nu poți transporta cine știe ce echipamente grele, ok, în noiembrie sau deja suntem în decembrie, da, în fine. Ei să încerce, de ce nu?
according to Ukrainian sources, the remainder of a Russian motorized rifle platoon, or roughly 20 men, simply fled from their combat positions near Krinky. Meanwhile, this other platoon was sent forward, but they got lost in the woods and didn't know what to do next. And not surprisingly, according to that same soldier, they had suffered heavy casualties. Although the Ukrainians sugarcoated their gains on the east bank of the Dnieper, the reality is that the Russians in the Kherson region established dispersed and multi-layered fortifications. So by mid-November, the Russian HQ probably ordered some of its troops back to a second line of defense in order to regroup and let artillery do its job.
Da? Apărarea elastică a rușilor.
That's why one of their first objective was to destroy the Ukrainian artillery batteries on the other side of the river. like this 2S3 Akatsuya self-propelled gun targeted by loitering munition 10 kilometers from the contact line. Meanwhile, Krinki would also take a beating, and
Asta
every building of the village was destroyed, one after the other. Here you can see the devastating effects of thermobaric rounds. And in this video, 2 Russian FAB bombs shatter entire sectors of the village. In response, Ukrainian soldiers are digging in or
da? Deci e clar că rușii folosesc astfel de arme, e clar că nu există ruși prin preajmă și teritoriul este controlat de ucraineni.
hiding in the basements of individual homes. Despite all the Russian shelling, on November 27, 2 Ukrainian assault detachments of the 2nd Battalion of the 38th Marine entrenched themselves in the forest south of the settlement. This is also when Ukraine DRGs restarted amphibious operations against Pichenivka and Boima, which, by the way, also got found by the Russian aviation. Ukrainian reports started to get worried as more and more Russian reinforcements arrived in the sector, namely the 810th Guards Marine Brigade and the 61st Marine Brigade. As a wrap-up, as of the 1st of December, the Dnieper was the only front where Ukraine was still conducting offensive operations. But it clearly didn't go as expected. Once again, this Ukrainian soldier interviewed by the BBC not only said that they expected the Russians to run away, never get high on your own propaganda.
Deci iarăși ăștia nu au învățat lecțiile de aproape 2 ani de lupte. Au rămas cu nostalgia contraofensivei din toamna lui 2022. Da? Că rușii chiar erau puțini pe unde atacau ăia și au preferat să se retragă și să-i bombardeze, să le pricinuiască pierdere în timp ce făceau manevre de retragere organizate. Bun.
Come on, we're 2 years into the war, and this is what Ukraine commanders still tell their troops. This is criminal. He also said the following: several brigades were supposed to be posted here, not individual companies. We just don't have enough men. An estimated 300 Ukrainian Marines were holding the
Da? Na, oameni, păi asta e, să pună dubele în funcțiune pe la Odessa sau pe unde mai patrulează ăștia, să caute prin stații de autobuz, să facă rost de trupe, nu?
beachhead in Krinki, but they were suffering 10.
Nu localurile scumpe din Kiev, de acolo nu, să ne înțelegem, nu acolo.
To 20 casualties a day. So all the reinforcements they got would not help them expand the bridgehead, but would simply act as replacements for all the casualties. As you can imagine, it became especially difficult for the Ukrainian troops to send back their wounded to the rear under enemy fire. In this video, a 10-man squad got targeted during rotation the moment they left cover as they tried to reach a boat in the river. By the 3rd of December, this following footage was released.
Yeah.
It was probably recorded somewhere in these woods as Ukrainians tried to break out of the village. The problem the Ukrainians are facing is that they can only ferry infantry on the other side of the river. Without
Că nu aduci tancul cu bărcuța pneumatică.
armored vehicles, no fire support for the infantry. And without armored vehicles, it will be very difficult, if not impossible, to expand the bridgehead. I think that's why they currently try to push in forested areas as there's some cover. But yeah, the transfer of heavy
În
equipment
zone împădurite, spune. Ok?
is impossible without the construction or the capture of a more or less stable river crossing. Now that I think about it, I think this is why they really wanted to capture the area of Pichenivka and Boima because of that railway bridge. Perhaps with enough repairs, Ukrainian sappers could allow vehicles to cross over. Due to the intensity of the fighting,
Saptatori sau cum a spus Google, nu știu dacă există așa ceva, adică ingineri, da?
near Krinki, fresh units of the 37th Marine Brigade arrived to rotate out a unit of Marines of the 36th Brigade. 3 days later, the entire 505th Battalion of the 37th Marine Brigade and units of the 38th Marine Brigade were ready to expand the bridgehead. And a couple days later, the Ukrainians even disembarked teams of Mk-19 grenade launcher units. This came as a Russian soldier of the 28th Brigade complained that the motorized riflemen that replaced them were not trained enough to be able to coordinate a proper counterattack. So we can also think that the Russians positioned a lot of their untrained troops near this quiet sector of the Dnieper. And if we follow this logic,
Stop. Bă, nu cred că rușii și-au poziționat trupe neantrenate. Probabil că Alex vrea să spună că rușii și-au poziționat trupe fără experiență, dar antrenate. Da? Rușii n-au, în acest război, în această operațiune militară specială, nu au oameni neantrenați.
perhaps that's also why
Au
the
antrenați care pot fi cu experiență sau fără experiență.
Ukrainians thought these troops would run away. So what was the Russian headquarters thinking about?
Well, no problem.
That's right, the Suhois now dropped more than 50 FAB 500s per day. And from this moment on, it was GG well played. Once again, the Ukrainian
GG, good game, cred că asta înseamnă. Well
and
played.
tried to organize some amphibious operations left and right, but the Russians were on high alert. This Ukrainian boat was spotted and then destroyed near Vichanivka, and this other unit was targeted by Russian aviation near the railway bridge. Meanwhile, this Ukrainian recon unit in the area of Belogorody Island, south of Kherson city, was forced to withdraw after contact with enemy patrols. On December 6, Forbes released this article stating, the 104th Air Assault Division deployed to southern Ukraine without much training. Funny how they never ever say this about Ukrainian units. But this time I have to give it to them. A few days later, one of the division's subunits, the 328th Airborne Regiment, attempted to dislodge the Ukrainian Marines from Krinky, and let's say they got into an entanglement, as Ukrainian sappers planted mines on all approaches to the village and reinforced existing firing positions. And that's where Reddit and Twitter were flooded. For example, here you can see 10 destroyed or abandoned Russian armored vehicles during this counterattack against Krinky. For example, in this video, Ukrainian officers analyzed the destruction of a Russian BTR-82A by an FPV drone, which was geolocated almost 4 kilometers east of Ukrainian positions. Meanwhile, in this footage, we can see 2 Russian tanks pushing forward with riflemen on top of the tanks. This is when they get spotted by Ukrainian artillery. The Russian infantry quickly dismounts as the tanks pull back. And according to that video, one of the 2 tanks then gets destroyed. Essentially, the Russians knew that the Ukrainian force here was only composed of light infantry.
Da, deci, ei au spus, bă, gata, înapoi acasă că nu merge pe aici, numai că unul dintre tancuri a fost lovit când încerca să spele Putin.
Their tactic was to rush armored vehicles into the bee's nest. But as you can see here, most of the vehicles were destroyed by mines, drones, and or artillery fire multiple kilometers away from the contact line. Despite this defensive win, due to the constant bombing of Ukrainian positions, and now even FAB 1500s, all the drones falling left and right, the need
Da? Deci acum nu mai vorbește de bombe de 500 de kilograme, ci de 1500 de kilograme. Priviți cum s-a descurcat Google Translate sau YouTube Translate sau ce-o fi.
for fresh meat increased. According to the Russians, on the 8th of December alone, 15 Ukrainian boats were destroyed, 4 vehicles, and the total loss of 100 casualties. However, by the 10th of December, Ukrainian troops still held the line in Krinky. But the question is, for what purpose? That's all I have for you today.
For what purpose and for what price? Adică cât plătesc pentru acest cap de pod, care, părerea mea, e că nu duce nicăieri. Mulțumesc pentru vizionare!